Hi folks, welcome back to the Enduro Workshop. Today I'm just going to quickly go over reverse bleeding of brakes and also clutches. Today we're just going to do the rear brake on the Gasgas, but this method also works just fine on the hydraulic clutches on the gases and other bikes as well. So hopefully I can do this without making too much of a mess, and yeah, you'll learn a few things along the way. Okay, first things first, up here on your rear brake, that's your master cylinder in there, actuated by the brake pedal. Down here we have the caliper with the slave cylinder in there, our bleed nipple here, and obviously they're connected by a brake line. Your front brake setup is basically the same, just different spots for stuff. So up here we have the master cylinder for your front brake, going down the line here to the caliper with the slave cylinders in there, two in these, and the bleed nipple for this is on top. And very similar on the clutch, master cylinder at the top and the slave down here with the bleeder on top there as well. One thing to note here, if you are doing clutches, just check on the cap as to what they're supposed to use. The gases use mineral oil in the clutch, and also check which brand or which rating of brake fluid you should use if you're doing your brakes. If you are doing clutches, I think I've mentioned this before, but the cheapest mineral oil I've found has to be mineral oil, is just to use a very lightweight fork oil. That works fine in clutches. Today we're going to be doing a brake though, so we're just going to be using some .4 specified on the cap there. So before we get into this too much, quickly, basically what we're trying to do is remove any air out of the system. It doesn't take a very big air bubble in there to make the whole lot go mushy, maybe even stop it from working altogether. One thing to remember about air in these systems is air will always try to travel to the highest point. So as you can see here, I've got the back wheel sitting on the ground. I've got the rear caliper quite a bit lower than the master cylinder. This isn't so much of a problem on the front end or with the hydraulic clutches, as your master is sitting up very high, but on the back end, do try to position your bike so that your master cylinder is a little higher than your caliper. Before you start bleeding, one thing to check, make sure your brake system is not leaking. If you have any brake fluid coming from around this area here on the master cylinder at the rear, you're pretty much wasting your time. That means your master cylinder kit is already leaking. You can bleed it as much as you like. It might feel alright for 5 minutes, but it will, if it can blow brake fluid out of there, it can certainly suck air in. So make sure your system isn't leaking before you spend your time doing the bleeding. And on your front brakes and clutch setups, they will generally leak in here. Again, if they're leaking, don't waste your time trying to bleed up brakes that are leaking. Get a master cylinder repair kit, put that in first. Okay, you don't really need much to do this, pretty much just an 8mm spanner. But one thing you will need to get your hands onto is a very big syringe with a bit of rubber tubing on the end, and I also like to use one of these little automotive hose clamp things. Just makes life a bit easier. Go for the big 100mm syringes. I get these off eBay for about $1 a piece or something like that. You can get them from veterinarian supply shops. They tend to be very expensive, but go ahead and order yourselves 5 or so of these. They come in handy for all sorts of stuff. They don't tend to last very long. I try not to reuse them too many times for contamination and stuff. Don't waste your time with these little ones that you'll get from a chemist. They're just too small. They make the job an absolute pain in the bum. Pop off your little rubber cap at the back here and give everything a good clean down. I just use a bit of braking parts cleaner and a bit of compressed air, but just clean out that nipple, make sure there's no dirt in the end here, and also just give around the cap of the master cylinder a quick clean down. Make sure they're nice and clean. A little bit of dirt in this system can make a dreadful, dreadful mess. So the next step is just to pop the cap off the master cylinder there. These shouldn't be done up too tight, as you'll see in a second. There shouldn't be too much of a drama to get them off usually. If you can use a spanner on them, that's always a better option than the Phillips head. The Phillips heads do tend to strip out pretty regularly. Basically have the rubber seal in there and the cap. If these are showing any dirt on them anyway, there's a little bit on there and on the top here as well. Just go through and give all that a bit of a clean down. Make sure all these parts are clean before you reassemble. Okay, so after you've got your cap off the master cylinder, the other thing is just to crack open your bleed nipple. It's a good idea to actually pull these out all the way. You may get a bit of brake fluid running out here. Don't worry about that at this stage, we're going to fix all that. As you can see here, this one's a little bit dirty on the inside there, which is not such a good thing. We might give that a clean up before we use it. But you'll also see this little hole in the side. I don't know if you can actually see that this far out. See if the camera will focus on it. There we go. See that little hole in the side? That basically just goes straight through to the top here. Just give that a clean, blow a bit of compressed air through it. Make sure that that passageway is clear and open. If there's a bit of dirt in here, you're going to have a whole lot of trouble trying to bleed your brakes. So once you're sure the bleed nipple's clean, just bung that back in where you got him from. Make sure you've got your little rubber dust cap on there. You don't have to do these up stupid tight at this point in time, just finger tight's fine. Like that. Okay, so I think we're ready to start all this. Chuck some gloves on if you're playing with brake fluid and other nasties like that. Also up that end, I've got some rags stuffed in behind the master cylinder. We will be making a mess up there, and I've also got a catch can on the ground here, just to catch anything that runs down. And we should be ready to go. Hopefully you can see everything I'm going to do here. So get your brake fluid. Try to use either a brand new or a very new container. This stuff does suck moisture in out of the air. It's hygroscopic, so don't use old brake fluid. That's a real no-no. First things first, we're just going to fill up our syringe. Probably don't even need to fill it up all the way. A good half fill, 60 ml or something like that's going to be heaps for us to use. Now, one of the tricks I've found with this is to try and get as much of that air out of the syringe as you can to start off with, and more importantly out of that tube. So after I've just filled it, I give it a little suck just to make sure that tube's empty, and then by gently pushing on it with it pointing straight up, you can pretty much get all the air bubbles out of there pretty much all the way to the top of that tube if you can. It really doesn't matter if you squirt a little bit on the ground at this point in time. When you get that tube full, oh, I know what I haven't done. Before you fill up your syringe, stick your 8 ml on that nipple there first. That's important. So anyway, back to getting the air bubbles out. Give that a gentle squeeze so you've got no more air bubbles left in there. And when it's right at the very tippy top, that's when I like to poke it onto there. As mentioned before, I've also got this little automotive clip, which can be a bit of a pain sometimes to use. But if you can get that on, I think it applies to do that even. Yeah, when you're up there. That's on there now. That just helps holding that hose on there. If you squeeze this too hard, you will end up with brake fluid going everywhere. So next step is just to gently crack open that bleed nipple and let everything rotate with it. You want to get it a good, at least a quarter turn open. And then it's just a simple process of holding your syringe up so that if there's any air bubbles in there, they all go to the top. Give it a little wiggle before you start in case there's one in that tube. And then just slowly push it in. You should hear it bubble, and that's the first lot of air bubbles coming out. And basically all you're doing is gently squeezing that down while watching your master cylinder up there. So I'm feeding this in from the back end, filling up the slave all the way up to the master, and once I get enough of this in, the master cylinder is just starting to come to the top now. I can't see any air bubbles coming out. I'll overflow that just a little bit to make sure. I still can't see any air bubbles coming out. No gurgling sounds, nothing weird like that. And then while applying a little bit of pressure to your syringe, simply shut your bleed nipple all the way back off. Just like that. And you can see I haven't even used all of 50 or 60 mil. I did completely drain this brake system before I did this, just so I could show you the whole process. Okay, so the other thing you can do if you're not getting a really good feel at your brake pedal just yet, just have everything hooked up the way you did with your brake bleed. No bubbles in there, and I find just gently cracking that open a little bit, not as much as normal, and actually sucking on the syringe. Hopefully what you should be able to see is the brake fluid level at your master going back down. This isn't quite doing it at the moment. It will suck in a bit of air from around the bleed nipple. There we go, now it's starting to go down the master. Shut that off again. And that just makes sure that any air bubbles trapped just in this area in here get sucked back out as well. You might have to do that a couple of times. Okay, so now I've done this a couple of times. Bleeding in, doing a reverse bleed, shutting everything off, opening it up again, sucking a bit out through the syringe, backwards and forwards. I've done that a few times now. Just each time checking the brake pedal until I've got a good feel in there. I've pushed the piston all the way back out by doing that. Getting good feel. I did have the syringe blow off once and squirted a bit of brake fluid around the place, as you can see, so I've got a bit more of a clean-up job here to do than perhaps normal, but that's pretty much the secret of it all, is just keep going backwards and forwards, make sure you got the air bubbles out of that end, suck any air out of this end that you can, on and on until you get good feel. Does usually take a couple of goes, but by far the best method I've found. Takes a little bit of practice, but anyway, that's how I do it. If you're having a bit of trouble getting a good bleed, another quick tip is just to push that piston there all the way back in. You can do that just with a screwdriver on your brake pads there. Just give it a little bit of a nudge sideways. Oh, it's going to be difficult for me as well. There we go, like that. And you can see that piston moving back in there, just gently so you don't wreck your brake pads, but you can push that pretty much all the way in. Just helps to remove the air volume in your caliper. So once you've done all that, before you button everything up completely, just give your brake pedal a few good pushes. So when you've got it all feeling nice on the pedal, nice and firm, no sponginess, just make sure your brake fluid level in there is down to the right level. It's generally a bit above the sight glass, I guess, but you do need either be a good 20 or 30 mil down in there just to allow the rubber of the cap to go in there. And that also allows for a bit of expansion if you ever push the piston back in. You haven't got the system completely full and start blowing seals and stuff, so there is definitely supposed to be a bit of an air gap in there. Just wash out your syringe with a bit of methylated spirits. That cleans up brake fluid pretty well. Just run a bit through there, give it a good shake around, pump it up and down. Make sure it's nice and clean and dry, and before you store it, pull the plunger most of the way up. They'll often stick if you put them all the way in. If you leave them open like that and just hang them up somewhere to dry, chances are it'll be good to use next time. We just drop the rub a bit down inside there. That can only go one way pretty much, so just make sure you got him facing the right way. And everything's looking pretty sweet and peachy. See your cap on over the top. Make sure you haven't got any folds in that and everything's sitting nicely. This one's actually being a little tricky here. and then drop your screws down in there. That rubber seal running through there, so just snug those guys down just gently. They certainly don't want to be fistfuls tight. Pretty much just a bit of one finger torque wrench on there, and that should be good. And last but not least, considering I've also made a bit of a mess in here, we'll just give everything a quick spray down with a bit of brake cleaner. Quite liberally on there, make sure everything's clean and tidy. You don't really want to leave that brake fluid anywhere, particularly on painted surfaces. And we'll just give the whole thing a quick dry off with some compressed air. Oh, that should pretty much do it. Got good brake feel here on the pedal. Definitely feel that bottoming out, not spongy, anything like that, so that's good. As soon as that hits the pads on the disc there, you can feel that going quite hard. So I think we'll call that a job done. Anyway, hope that helps. Don't forget to subscribe and like my videos, guys, and feel free to share them around. Obviously this isn't going to work just on a Gasgas bike, pretty much any bike. Nissan brakes are all the same. In fact, most brake systems are very much the same, so this can be used on pretty much anything. Anyway, have a good weekend, guys. Hope you all get a ride in.